Good afternoon, everybody. I think we can start now that everybody is admitted in the session. My name is Laura Palomo Rios, and I will be facilitating and introducing this session today. I work at the Research Executive Agency, REA, one of the agencies of the Commission working on the implementation of Horizon 2020 program. And well, I would like, first of all, to thank you for joining today this session of the Covenant of Mayors Investment Forum. The session, as you know, is called Nature and the City, Finance and Procurement of NBS, Nature-Based Solutions for Urban Climate Change Adaptation. And in this session today, we'll count with the contribution of several speakers that you have listed out in the slide that you can see in the screen, coming from 3 different Horizon 2020 projects that are often collaborating together. No? They are Urban Green Up Project, GrowGreen, and UNaLab. These 3 projects were selected under the same call of Horizon 2020 program back in 2016. They started 1 year later, and they have been working often in collaboration to demonstrate the use of nature-based solutions to address climate resilience in cities. But they are not alone working on this topic. There are indeed, or there is indeed a large portfolio of projects funded by the European Commission through Horizon 2020. We have more than 30 projects working on the topic of nature-based solutions. And these 3 projects are coming from the first batch of projects in Horizon 2020. For the session today, we have here the 3 coordinators of the projects that I will introduce in a second, and also representatives of the cities that are involved in the projects and are actively working on the implementation of nature-based solutions in cities. We have 8 speakers in total, so I'll go quickly through the introduction in a minute, but I would like to give you some practicalities on the session. First of all, on the timing. The session is a bit longer than usual, so we have 1 hour 45 maximum for this session. It's longer than the other one, so we have combined 2 slots for bringing the 3 projects together. And we'll start with a series of presentations for a bit more than an hour, and then we'll go into the panel discussion for about 30 minutes. That will be moderated by one of the coordinators of the project, Laura Wendling. During the presentations, please, you can go to the chat window that you have available in Zoom. It's indicated, you should have it indicated at the bottom of your screen. And there, please, while the speakers are presenting, you can type there your questions, and Laura will collect these questions and bring them to the panel discussion at the end of the session. Yes, what else? Other housekeeping rules. Yes, please keep yourselves mute during all the time. At least you are asked to take the floor, so please be mute also to avoid background noise. And you have also the participant windows. You can see in that way who else is also in the session. But well, that's the other thing. I think I have everything. And I'll go then through the presentations. I'll introduce all the speakers at once, because we want to keep the flow of the presentations later on, because they alternate among themselves. So I'll start with Ernesta Marchulite. I'll be quick, so I'll try to be quick to not to spend too much time on this, and give you the floor. Ernesta, she's working on the project UNaLab as an independent expert on topics related to financing, procurement, and business models on urban MBS, and is one of the main co-authors of a study published last year by the European Commission on the public procurement of nature-based solutions. Alicia Villazán, she comes from the project Urban Green Up, has an academic background, environmental science and environmental management in business, with large experience at international level, consultancy, training, and education. And currently she works as innovation senior technical specialist at the Valladolid City Council in Spain. Yes, thank you. Julia Staples, she comes from the project Urban Green Up. She's the lead Liverpool City Council officer for environment and green space strategy and development. She has an extensive academia background with a PhD in ecosystems management and 25 years of experience in environmental sector with a particular focus on climate change adaptation, resilience, and ecosystem management. Sophie Schell, sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing well the names, working for the 15 last years at the Manchester City Council in projects related to climate change, such as in transport, energy, or green infrastructures. She's the deputy coordinator of the project GrowGreen. Marit Schell from UNaLab. She is a waste and water management professional with 10 years of expertise, experience in circular economy and nature-based stormwater management. And she works currently as project manager excuse me, at the city of Tampere in Finland. She's also finishing her PhD on sustainable transition in infrastructure sectors. Michelle Odi is the coordinator of the project GrowGreen, works as project manager at Manchester City Council, and she has also managed previously other H2020 projects like Triangulum on energy and mobility in cities. And she has a master's degree in building surveying and a large and diverse career, including economics and business sector, and also academic activities on the topic. Raul Sanchez is the coordinator of the Urban Green Up project. He has an academic background in agroforestry, a master on economic sociology and politics. And from 2005, he works at the Cartier Foundation, where he is the head of the Natural Resources and Climate area in the Agri-Food and Natural Processes Division, where they are working on the topic, extensively on the topic of nature-based solutions. And I think I am on the last one. Luke Postmes from the project UNaLab is a civil engineer for the municipality of Eindhoven in the Netherlands, working for more than 20 years, bringing his water expertise as a policymaker. His task, I'm phrasing you, is to make Eindhoven a climate resilient city. And Luke is turning this task into an opportunity to make the city more attractive and livable. And without more delay, I give the floor to Ernesta that will start with the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. This has been indeed an interesting introduction. Thank you for that. Just checking if my sound is okay. Everyone can hear me fine? Okay, great. Thank you. So you could move to the next slide. Right. Thank you. Yes, so once again, my name is Ernest and hello to everyone. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to open this session on the urban nature-based solutions and touching on the financing and procurement topics today. So in the next slightly less or slightly more, sorry, than 10 minutes, I will cover research aspects that we have worked on as part of the Urban Nature Labs project, as well as the European Commission task force activities. I have a slide prepared on the European Commission task force, what that is and what does it do. So bear with me, I will get to that in a minute. However, I would like to start with setting the context a little bit for the research on these two topics that we will hear more on today, also in the next presentations by the speakers. So on one hand, we have the financing strategies topic, and on the other hand, we have the public procurement field. And both of these were investigated as part of our UNaLab project. And for the financing strategies, we were mostly asking ourselves the question, how can NBS be financed both by public and private sources, as well as we investigated this, or we worked along this narrative of how could the private sector financing could actually be attracted to the NBS projects, to ensure that this is a sustainable long-term financing and these projects simply don't end or interventions don't cease to exist once the pilot projects stop. So that would be kind of the context of the research for the financing strategies. As for public procurement topic, we even came across these questions, why do we even care about the public procurement if we're talking about the NBS? And the answer would be quite simple here, is that usually when it comes to NBS projects, cities are actually right at the core of the projects. And for the cities as public agencies to be able to put the interventions in place, simply they have to go through public procurement processes very often. And we thought that perhaps we should take a little bit closer look. What does the process look like? Is there any barriers, and what opportunities could come from this field? So that would be a rough setup of these research questions that we looked into. And I would just like to also say that even though this was done as part of UNaLab and as part of European Commission task force activities, I feel it is quite representative of many of the discussions that take place in the context of other projects in this field. So I feel, again, quite honored to have the chance to open this this talk, and I believe these aspects will be touched upon in later presentations when we see more practical examples. So if you switch to the next slide now. Yes, thank you. I'll give a bit more details on the first working stream here, which is the financing strategies that we had in the UNaLab project. So we actually had a deliverable under the project, which ended up being a report that identified 5 broad financing strategies that could be used for NBS projects. You see a statement here on the type of methods we used. I will not go into so much depth there. It was a mix of, talking to stakeholders, doing desktop research, just basically seeing what's out there. This report is available on the UNaLab website. I encourage you to take a look if you're interested. But in the next slide, you see a quick recap. If you could go to the next slide, please. A quick recap and summary of those five categories of the financing strategies that we put together. And here we really, I don't think we came up with some groundbreaking new insights. However, what we tried to do is organize a little bit what's out there and how could we provide a more systematic approach and an overview on what tools and strategies exist there for the cities to employ, on one hand, to finance these projects in the long term, on the other hand, perhaps try to and attract a little bit more of the private sector participation. So here you see there's different categories ranging from partnerships to incentive programs, and as well as simply just, imposing taxation and requirements. So again, this is just a quick recap. There's more on this in our report, and I think I would not dwell on this for too long as the time is limited. Thank you for switching the slides. Then on the second work stream, on the procurement of NBS, here the work that was done at UNaLab fed quite nicely in this European Commission task force work. And as promised, I have a slide on what that is. So the task force, this particular task force that looked into this topic is called Governance, Business Models and Financial Mechanisms of NBS. And it's one of the six task forces that are active right now. It clusters about 20 Horizon 2020 projects. And as it was mentioned, even in the very introduction to this section, there is very high focus on promoting collaboration, promoting joint outputs, so that the efforts are not duplicated too much, but instead the synergies are explored among these projects. So there are other task forces focusing on different topics. Again, I encourage you to take a look. I believe now the task forces are hosted on the Network Nature platform. And again, I think there's quite some information on that. Overall, it's a very nice atmosphere, very nice collaborative initiative to join forces of all these different NBS projects taking place at different moments in time. When talking about joint outputs, if you go to the next slide, we have an example of that. And as was mentioned in the introduction, last year we published a report on the procurement of NBS, which basically relied on 9 case studies of cities who have procured NBS, including UNaLab cities, as well as cities of other projects, which whose logos you can see on the slide on the bottom. So what this report does is it provides a barrier and opportunity analysis for the procurement of NBS, drawn from those case studies. And the second point that we have here under what the contents of the report is providing broad recommendations for the different levels of governance. So we covered the EU, we covered national level, city, and even the procurement officer levels. Of course, those recommendations are rather broad, rather general, because I'm sure, as many of you can imagine who have ever dealt with such tasks, it's rather a challenge to provide the, full-fledged recommendations. However, we did our best to try to cover as much ground as we could. And if you go to the next slide, I have here listed just a few examples of the barriers that we identified as part of this research and as part of the report. And again, you'll find more information on this in the publication itself. However, I would maybe like to mention one which was a bit perhaps even surprising to a certain extent. So this was, for example, the barrier on difficulty finding skilled suppliers. We saw that in some of the case studies that we looked into. The cities faced the barrier of actually getting sufficient market response to fulfill the tender requirements that were out. So this was rather interesting because you might not think about this at the first glance. However, there might be certain situations where, let's say, the market is not mature yet, or the market players are startups, they do not have enough track record to be able to fulfill the criteria. So this was perhaps one of those more unexpected and more interesting barriers. But however, it's just one of the few that we identified, and we have others, such as, of course, limited access to funding, lack of NBS typology, lack of knowledge and experience. So again, I will not go into so much depth here. I'd just like to mention that these are the ones that we worked with, and there was even some surprising findings there. If we go to the next slide, we have a compilation of a selection of potential solutions to the barriers that we found. And here, of course, we have such things as knowledge and awareness raising, as well as adjusting tender requirements to promote challenge-based thinking, challenge-based specifications to let basically the market and the market players help you solve your challenge instead of prescribing everything as part of the tender publication. And one more point I'd like to mention under the potential solutions was that we should also not discount the significance of the pilot projects. Even though they are usually rather short-term interventions. However, we saw that they're actually quite crucial for demonstrating that success, for getting the local stakeholder buy-in, and then really kicking off the whole process of then developing more long-term approaches and long-term financing for NBS. So I think we could go to the next slide now. Here you have a very rough summary of our key recommendations. Again, you see the 4 different levels that I've mentioned before. And I think in general, what we tried to capture with these recommendations was how could these different levels of administrations make sure that we move more towards more flexible procurement processes, as well as we encourage the exchange in terms of perhaps different departments in the municipality working together, as well as even such idea as establishing center of excellence that would then allow the cities, once they find themselves into the situation of procuring NBS, to draw upon the knowledge gathered by others. I see I have 1 minute left, which is excellent because I'm right at the end of my presentation. I think I only have one thank you slide left. So thank you, everyone. Again, the resources are available on those websites, and stay put for the other talks, which provide really nice examples of some of the aspects I touched on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernesta. Raúl Sánchez from Urban Green Up is next.
Thank you, Ernesta. Thank you very much, Laura, for your kind introduction. And thank you for the Covenant of Major Organization for inviting me on behalf of Cardiff Urban Green Project to share with all of you some of naturalization activities of the project, and in this case, activities related to financing needs. So our colleague from Valladolid and Liverpool City Councils will explain it in detail, showing some success stories in both cities. But previously, I would like to comment some of the main four main groups of key financial needs that we have identified at essential part of this topic. First, we think that the public-private collaborations are essential to involve the main operative stakeholders when we are talking about the nurturing project in a city. Also, we think that we need to achieve extra co-funding with municipal budget. Cities need to be involved from the very beginning of this project. It is necessary that the cities support the MBA's implementations, considering their naturalization as part of their local budgets or local activities. Third party and stakeholder involvement is also essential, taking into account also the legal agreements for ongoing maintenance with host of nature-based solutions. It will be really useful to generate economic and social activities around the MBA's projects, and also placing of many nature-based solutions on third-party land and building as another way to make the citizenship a part of our naturalization projects. And finally, from a council approach, I think that this is important to use of short-term establishment, drawing with replanting, for instance. We need also take into account the benefits of council maintenance budgets through change in the land use. This is the management of the land use is very, very important, and of course, it is necessary to achieve the community engagement. So our colleague Alicia and Juliet are going to continue with the success stories in Valladolid and Liverpool. So I think that Alicia, please.
Ready. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of Valladolid City Council, we are one of the front-runner cities of the Urban Green project, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. Next slide. I wanted to share with you two examples that we have in the frame of the Urban Green project of public-private collaborations. What you see in the photograph is one of the solutions that we have implemented in Valladolid. It's a green facade of more than 550 square meters, and it's installed in a private building. This private building belongs to El Corte Inglés, which is a department store, very well known in Spain, and they have many centers like this one all over Spain and even abroad. So we signed an agreement with them to reflect the conditions about for this agreement. As we are a city council, we cannot have any non-contractual relation with any private apart from this agreement. So we signed last year. Next slide, please. Last year, we signed this agreement with El Corte Inglés with the detailed conditions. Okay, the conditions of this agreement said that El Corte Inglés has to be in charge of building the clamping structure of the vertical garden, and they are in charge of the maintenance. So they build part of the vertical garden. In fact, they built the part of the vertical garden related to the work indoor. They didn't want us to touch anything of their building inside the walls. So they prepare the building inside the walls to receive the vertical garden. what we built, thanks to the Urban Green Up project and also co-financing, Valladolid City Council built and installed the vertical garden. So, in fact, this public-private collaboration has been a win-win for the two entities, because there wasn't any economic or financial relation between the two of us. We didn't exchange money, but we were very well coordinated to implement the two sub-projects on time, because first, the El Corte Inglés built their structure, and then we were ready with the procurement launch and awarded to a construction company, and we built the vertical garden after that. So the situation worked very well, and one of the positive points of this relation is the maintenance. They are in charge of the maintenance. So in fact, the vertical garden is ours. It belongs to the city council, but as it's installed in this private space, they are in charge of the maintenance, and they will receive the vertical garden in the future. Next slide, please. The second example that I wanted to share is the electro-wetland, one of the technologies that we are also implementing in the Urban Green Up project. And it's also a public-private collaboration with a technology center, which is called LATAT. LATAT's technology center are also partners of the Urban Green Up project, but we couldn't construct the electro-wetland only under this European project. We needed to sign an agreement because the City Council is not financing the solution. The solution is financed by LATAT and with the EU funds. So the relation between us is articulated thanks to a collaboration agreement where LATAT constructs, operates, and maintains the electro-wetland. And what the City Council do is transfer the public land. I mean, giving them the permissions to build this highly innovative solution into a real scenario with a real demonstrative field in a city, in a real urban environment like Valladolid. So this is an opportunity for private entities to give them a demonstrative scenarios to build the different solutions, and that's how we manage this solution with them through another collaboration agreement. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Hello, thank you. I'm Juliet Staples from Liverpool City Council. We're also a front-runner city in the Urban Green Up project. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a couple of slides about addressing the nature-based solution, ongoing establishment and maintenance as part of the Urban Green Up project. We seem to have jumped a few slides there. So one way to address the nature-based solutions is to use third-party land and stakeholder financial engagement, which is what we've been doing. And we've been involving several external organisations in the ongoing aftercare of nature-based solutions. And that's really important because financial maintenance costs are just not available really for local authorities. So it's really important that we have third parties that can pick up these longer term costs for us. Also, having third parties engaged encourages external host ownership and it places a value on the nature-based solution as well. I think also when external businesses and organisations are involved, it allows them to demonstrate corporate social responsibility, it allows them to commit to climate change, and it allows them to, it facilitates their learning about the role of nature-based solutions. And I think also it's having these organisations act as pioneers for nature-based solutions is really important for the council because we don't own all the land and we don't own all the buildings. So it's really important that other people are also seen to gather this agenda. And I would now move on to the next slide. The next slide does actually show some photographs of the city. And what we've done is we've used a range of legal agreement templates to put these agreements in place with the cities. And that's allowed, they're flexible and they allow for things like ongoing risk, reputational issues, maintenance obligations, initial establishment periods, etc. And they just clarify those responsibilities. And we've done this and we've worked with third parties and we've put trees into registered provider land. We've put trees onto and planting onto pollinator balconies to create green roofs and also for the green roofs and green walls in the city as well. And my final slide is really about how the city are addressing the financing of these nature-based solutions. So in addition to using third parties, the city is also looking at what it can do. So we're integrating nature-based solutions into our key city schemes. And this is really important because this allows us to pass on the costs of some of the civils works to the other departments. And of course, they also take on the long-term maintenance of the green infrastructure as well. We're also looking at the types of planting that we do. So we're looking more and more at plants that need less maintenance, that are more drought tolerant, more sustainable to different conditions. We're using short-term dowries, 3-year kind of establishment dowries for some of the tree planting. Now, that's the time when it's most vulnerable, and we really want to be sure that we can grow the trees past those first few years and keep them there as permanent facilities and benefits really to the environment. The other thing we're looking at is building business cases. So we're looking at beginning to pull together some early business case studies, really looking at how the costs on the maintenance of the sustainable urban drainage ponds actually outweighs the annual cleanup costs from the flooding that happened previously, and also looking at how the changes in land management play out. So rather than cut the grass 30 times every year, we're looking now at obviously having something like pollinators, cutting 2 or 3 times a year, maybe reducing the spraying and changing the land management costs that we use. We've worked heavily with the community. We've engaged them in the design and the implementation of some of our schemes. And that's been really useful now because they're now stepping in and wanting to adopt and help to care for some of these schemes as well. And although it's not actually on the slide, one of the things we are looking at now is about sponsorship for some of that longer term maintenance as an exit strategy really to the Urban Green Up project. Thank you. Next slide.
I think it's due to be me next, Juliet. So I'll just crack on because I know we're a bit short on time. So my name's Sophie Shield. I'm from Manchester City Council. I'm part of the coordination team here on the GrowGreen project. So thank you very much for having us. Our talk is ever so slightly different to the talks that we've heard already, because although on GrowGreen we haven't got any sort of innovative financing mechanisms or public-private collaborations, what we wanted to talk to you about in the Manchester context was how our strategy, our green infrastructure strategy, combined with the demonstration project that Manchester as a front-runner city has built in West Gorton, has really catalysed the conversations and how that's allowing Manchester to kind of scale up and also scale down our ambitions around green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. So as you can see there, our green infrastructure strategy, Manchester's Great Outdoors, was first published in 2015, following extensive consultation with officers, citizens, businesses and the third sector. However, this strategy didn't have any set funding associated with it, but what it did do was set the ambition of Manchester to have high quality accessible green spaces, and it provided the mandate for officers to spend time developing projects and finding the money to implement them. Also what it did, as you can see from the picture on the left now, was it embedded the green infrastructure strategy into Manchester's highest level policies. So the Our Manchester policy you see there at the top is a co-created sort of city-led vision for Manchester. The local plan is our local planning framework, and also the climate change action plan, which obviously has seen you know, come to increase prominence in recent years since the declaration of a climate emergency. So we could say that the success and ambition of that GI strategy since 2015 led directly towards us becoming part of the GrowGreen consortium and then securing the GrowGreen funding. However, when the park at West Gorton was completed, as you can see there in the picture on the right, last summer, even during COVID, I think what we failed to realise quite how much having that physical park would enable us to catalyse those sorts of conversations, both internally within the municipality and also sort of wider with professionals of various descriptions and various different departments in our municipality. So I think that combination of the strategy and then the demo project, it was allowing us to scale up. So if you move to the next slide, please. Can. As you can see, an unfunded GI strategy combined with the demonstration project has led to an upscaling of our ambition. So it's important to note here, as you can see from these pictures, that although our first smallest project on the left at West Gorton was funded through the Horizon 2020 grant, the other two projects, both of a larger scale that we mention here, are developer-led, privately led, and both of those are bringing forward green infrastructure and green credentials as a key element of their developments. They see that as a key thing that satisfies, you know, the city policymakers and politicians, but also a key thing that, you know, to make a place where people want to live and to work. And they are both also bringing forward some green elements of those developments in the first phase. The green is not an afterthought. The green is coming at the beginning. The green will be the marketing element of those developments. So I think that's been a really key thing. Both of those have been really interested to be engaged with the West Gorton project. They're both talking more about nature-based solutions since they've had conversations with us at West Gorton. So if you move to the next slide, in the last minute or so that I've got, I also thought it was quite important to talk about the scaling down as well. A few years ago in Manchester, we were part of a project called En Route, where we worked with the West Country Rivers Trust, who produced us these really interesting benefits wheels, which show the ecosystem service benefits that we're receiving from each of the wards in our city, the political small areas in our city. So as you can see there on the right, we see all the benefits that each ward is currently realising from green infrastructure, but also there are recordings of the potential in some of those areas. These studies, as well as West Gorton, it should be said, where we've already had visits from local groups and local politicians, really sort of helped local regeneration officers start to put green into their local plans. I think particularly in these times of COVID and lockdown, the local politicians and the local regeneration officers are seeing green spaces as something really important. The one round the corner is just as important as the big shiny one 3 miles away that you'd need to get a bus on. So wanted to talk about that as well, just that, you know, we've got the ambition and the scale from our strategy, but we've also got the local level projects and the local level interest that our demonstrator in West Gorton is also able to interest people on and spark their interest. They can see sub elements of the parts of our larger park at West Gorton. They can see a swale to carry the water. They can see a small area with a little allotment. They can see various different things in that park that they could bring to their small patch on their local area. So that's sort of the story about how Manchester's strategy came about and how Manchester is doing now, and hopefully that adds to this conversation around demonstration projects catalysing things to get moving. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. And before the next speaker, Mary, takes the floor, I would like just to remind the people in the audience that you can use the chat and type there your questions to the speakers, and then we'll go through them during the panel session at the end. Thank you. And next is Marit.
Thank you, Laura. Greetings from North Finland, city of Tampere. I'm going to tell you about the funding we used in our nature-based solutions project, UNaLab. We used this innovation voucher approach to develop small-scale nature-based solutions to the city. We opened the call on the city website, and then we held an information event in the Living Lab area, the city district called Vuores. And we told that we are going to hand out 3 innovation vouchers worth 10,000 euros. And we called for the projects developed by local residents that focus on greening the city and biodiversity, water management, and social connectivity. And we received 3 applications. Next, please. First of the projects was this common garden of 2 apartment houses. It used to be this dry grass area in between the houses, but the residents together planned a new kind of small garden with perennials, fruit trees, berry bushes, gardening boxes, compost, and roof water harvesting for irrigation. And City of Tampere gave 6,500 euros for the materials, and the residents implemented the garden by themselves, and they are also maintaining it. And they have been quite happy with this project, especially in the time of COVID. They were able to organize it without meeting each other, but they did the planning in the digital platforms, and then one by one went to implement part of the garden, and that went well. Next, please. And the second project funded with this innovation voucher approach was edible garden of an apartment house. It's similar to the first one, but it was only single apartment house that realized this, and this was a little bit smaller, so the materials were only 1,000 euros, and also the implementation and maintenance was here by the residents of the house. And there are gardening boxes and fruit trees, and residents have organized how they produce food here and how they harvest it and share it. And next one. And the last innovation voucher project was a community horse paddock. There's a local horse stable in the Vuores, nearby the Vuores city district, and they organized this kind of new activity and also form of maintenance in the park. Next, please. And my final slide, I have some reflections. What was successful in the innovation voucher was that it encouraged residents and other actors of the city and municipality to ideate and implement novel nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions created were feasible. They were do-it-yourself type rather than expensive and technical. And participants enjoyed working with their neighbors. And in the future, we are going to probably replicate this innovation voucher approach, but maybe in more dense and old parts of the city than Vuores. Thank you.
Thank you, Marit. And before we go into the next speaker, I'll give a few seconds to the technical person that is helping us with this presentation to make sure that there's a an issue with the slides that we had before with the timer is solved.
It's okay now, Laura.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and we go now then with the next speaker, Michelle Odi, that will talk on barriers and lessons learned from the point of view, from the perspective from the GrowGreen project. You can go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you everybody for joining this session, which I've found really interesting myself so far, listening about what's been going on in the other cities. This is it's a really difficult topic to try and summarise, really, because I think one of the things that we've learned from GrowGreen is that these nature-based solution projects are highly individualistic, and it's really difficult to come up with a recipe to get NBS projects funded that you can scale up, because they're also location specific. So during GrowGreen, if you can just go on to the next slide, please. I think we've started to, highlight some common themes here. So you've got a whole load of challenges to overcome before the implementation, and then a whole load of challenges to overcome during the implementation. But similar to the other projects in GrowGreen, we've had issues around procurement and actually finding somebody to deliver our demonstration project. And there have been issues around getting the planning permission, particularly one of our projects in GrowGreen is in a sort of conservation area, and that's been difficult to secure the relevant planning permission, but also getting local and political support. But I think really around the sort of key lesson learned on the finance is that if you've got the political will to do a project, an NBS project, the money will be found. So really, in terms of where your efforts need to be placed, it's on it's getting the political support for these initiatives. If you can go on to the next slide, please. Which I'll come back to that point in a minute. So again, during the implementation, we've found it difficult to find skilled contractors to do the work, particularly around SUDs. There's a picture there on the right-hand side of the installation of one of our SUDs features, and that particular piece of work had to be redone several times to get the levels right in the water flow. So, the contractor that we ended up with wasn't very experienced in this line of work, but we were really struggling to get a contractor in the first place. And also you've got to manage the co-design issues during the implementation, because residents and cities and businesses and highways engineers all want different things out of the scheme. So you've got to balance those needs across a project that's difficult. Next slide, please. So something again that I'm going to come back to in a minute is this issue of you've got the capital funding, you've overcome all the barriers of developing the project and building the project, and then you've got a whole load of another project really in its own right, managing the site or the installation once it's been completed, and the responsibilities that you've got to hand over, and this sort of multi-million-dollar question: who's going to pay for the ongoing maintenance of this beautiful thing that you've created? Next slide, please. So really, what we're starting to appreciate now in GrowGreen is that the financial challenges need to be separated out into the capital side and the revenue side. And I think we have started to understand more about the capital side of it. I think cities can borrow money at such a low rate of interest. They don't really need to seek private sector funding in a scheme. They can borrow the money themselves very cheaply, but what you need to do is establish the political will to want to do that. So that's about broadcasting to politicians in your city the benefits that they're going to get from making this investment. The revenue funding side is much more complicated, and I think in Manchester anyway, we haven't really come up with any solutions to that. What we're finding is that the park that we've built as our demonstration project is costing more to maintain than a standard park would. The swales need active maintenance because they're getting blocked up with leaves and things like that. The care that some of the sort of planting schemes and stuff that we've designed it needs an enhanced level of maintenance, and city councils don't have the budgets to do that. So we're looking at alternatives like trying to establish voluntary groups to take on a bit of the maintenance in these parks. We're in a kind of really difficult situation. I guess most cities across the world are like this now. Our green spaces in Manchester have been heavily used and really highly valued during the pandemic. Everybody's using their local parks way more than they ever did before. And our demonstration park's getting great use. It's brilliant to see everybody out there using the space, but they're getting used to an extent that we need to increase the maintenance. But the city council's budget has been absolutely devastated by the cost of COVID. So we've got increased use and limited budgets, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. So I'm not sure what the solution is to that, but that's where we're going to be putting our efforts on the project in the next year, in the final year of the project. I think the capital side is complicated and difficult, but not as difficult as the revenue side. So that's where we're going to be focusing our efforts. Next slide, please. So in order to sort of address the issues around the capital and the ongoing revenue side, it's really all about trying to tie up the benefits to the right stakeholder. So I think the previous projects, UNaLab and I've forgotten Urban Green Up. Sorry, I'm forgetting which projects we're working with today. We've all talked about that, the public sector does need to make an investment in MBS, but private public sector working is the way that we can actually scale up these things. But it's about making sure that each individual investor in a scheme knows what benefit they're going to get out, because mainly the benefits pertain to the public sector. So that's why the public sector really needs to be the main investor in these schemes. However, depending on what kind of nature-based solution you use, whether you're looking at sort of water management or heat stress or biodiversity, there will be other beneficiaries. And if you can try and get them to invest, that's the key to unlocking it. So one of the areas where we've not really seen much development in Manchester is getting the health sector to start to invest in these schemes. So why isn't the local sort of health providers investing in the development of parks when they're getting a benefit from it? Because you'd like to think people are healthier, happier, etc. if they go to the park. Why aren't they using social prescribing, using their local park? So these are the kind of benefits we need to start to unlock if we're really going to scale up nature-based solutions in a big way across Manchester, but also the UK and the rest of Europe and globally. So this slide here is trying to articulate what the actual benefits are and how you can allocate them out. And that would obviously help you do a fairly comprehensive business case when you're trying to secure capital and revenue funding for a big MBS scheme. I think that's me. Next slide. Let me just double check. Yeah, so we just wanted to throw this one into the mix because in an ideal world, you would have your strategy and then you would do your project. But what we're realizing is that actually projects sometimes come before strategy. So it's more of it's not a linear process. You sometimes get projects done just because people want to do it, and it's not falling out of the strategy, and that helps create strategy. So you kind of need strategy and doing going on at the same time if you really want to get this MBS scaled up to an extent that we'd all be happy with. And I think that is me. Back to you, Laura.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much. It was a nice overview from GrowGreen, and we go back to Urban Green Up that is going to talk. Raúl Sánchez is going to talk again about barriers from Urban Green Up.
Thank you, Laura. Yes. Just to introduce briefly the main barriers and lessons learned identified in the context of the Urban Green Up project before the deepest explanation from Liverpool and Valladolid. We have identified in our project a common group of barriers and as an example of barriers in procurement of nature-based solutions, mainly the tendering or barriers related to tendering processes. Also, we have identified the barriers related to community, the barriers and lesson learned about community and stakeholder consultation and opposition to the plans to plans of the city. This is very important aspect to have the welcoming, the acquiescence of people in order to avoid the impact of the nature-based solutions in cities, the bad impact in cities. We also need to develop surveys about the utilities, environmental, highways, or something like this. And finally, we need the approvals related to city council services, political aspect, stakeholder. Also, we need to get the permissions, specifically when we are talking about planning. And finally, we need to obtain also all the legal licenses, fire regulations, etc. All aspects related to local regulations. So now our colleagues Alicia and Juliet are going to deal in these aspects. Please, Alicia.
Thank you. Ready. Next, please. Okay, just again, I will share with you the experience that we have got with the Urban Green Up project in implementing nature-based solutions. Next, please. Especially related with procurement. Just to give you a few numbers, only in Valladolid, we have implemented 11 works contracts, most of them open, under the open procedure, 6 services contract about surveys and projects, etc., and 5 supply contracts. So more than 20 projects or procurement launched on the Urban Green Up project just in Valladolid. We have identified with all the cities that belong to the Urban Green Up project consortium. We are 3 from runner cities, Valladolid, Liverpool, that Juliet is already here, and also Izmir from Turkey. And with the help of our follower cities, Mantova, Ludwigsburg, Medellin, and Dindin, we have made this deliverable. You can see the name on this slide. We have made some guidelines to tendering process specification. You will be able to download this report soon in our website. So the key stages of the typical tendering processes include: the first stage is preparation and planning, the second, initiation the tender, evaluation the proposals, awarding, and contract implementation. We have identified, with all the experience of all the cities of the Urban Green Up, we have identified the key stages there. The key stages for the cities are, first, the technical project. It's very important to have a technical project, very well defined, adapted to the location, and it will make the process easier if the technical project is very well defined. It's one of the main documents of the procurement. The second key stage is to select the evaluation criteria. It's very difficult to identify different criteria for procurement nature solutions, because we don't want only to consider the money, to consider the less expensive proposal, because we have also included some other criteria, such as quality and experience of the procurer, and increasing the scope, that is, who gives me more with the same money, or reduction in the execution time, who is faster constructing. So the money is not the main criteria when we score nature solutions. The next key stage is the selection of suitable procurers. As you have mentioned before, it's not easy to find suitable procurers and suitable companies to develop this type of native solutions. So this is also challenging for the cities. Just next, it's a diagram. I have a next slide. It's not a slide, it's a diagram that, yes, there. But we need to know that the public procurement is slow, more or less on average. We have identified that it takes more or less 12 months to develop a procurement for constructing native solution. The tendering takes from 3 to 5 or 6 months. The execution from 5 even to 12 months, and then the phase of contract closure takes another extra month. So more or less, if you want to implement native solutions, you need to think of a timing of at least 1 year. Next, please. And what are the lessons learned and the tips that we would like to share with you? Plan the implementation of the native solutions according to a schedule, okay? Because administrative processes can take more time than expected. Plan carefully the annual financial elements, because to be sure that you work on an annual in the same fiscal year or in a midterm basis. For economic issues, it's very important to know if you work in the same year or if you are working in different years. The technical project is one of the key documents. I have said it before. You may need more than one tender for only native solution, because you may need one tender for the construction, but another one for the project, and another one for the works management, and maybe another one for the quality control. So be sure that you have the experience in procurement to get all these aspects of the implementation. Rely on the support of experts in each discipline. We cannot know about everything, so be sure to count with a legal, technical, and procurement departments that support in the process. Create a multidisciplinary team in the council. This is very important to promote the cross-department exchange that you have mentioned, other projects have mentioned before, also very important. Coordinate among the council department with different responsibilities and priorities is not easy, because we have different interests, and even political interests are different among the different councillors. Make tenders easier for companies, because public tendering can discourage smaller organizations to go through the awarding. And the tendering scoring criteria must be clear, easy, and preferably mathematically quantifiable. Then you avoid just misunderstandings or just subjective opinions for the tenderings. And last but not least, allow time and resources for the unexpected. This is something that my colleague Juliet Staples says, and it's very important. Be aware for the unexpected. And that's all. Next. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alicia. We have still one more presentation from Urban Green Up.
Thank
Juliet.
you. Thank you very much. Okay, so from Liverpool, I wanted to talk about a couple of the barriers and challenges. Seem to be having problems with the slides again. I don't know what's gone wrong. The first barrier I wanted to talk about was about consultation and also about opposition, because not everybody actually wants a nature-based solution near them, and there are many concerns. So sometimes people are very worried about the potential failure and how it might look, and that's often due to things like poor implementation, but it does pose a risk for city councils. There's also concerns around the long-term commitment to maintenance and poor aftercare. People think that once it's in, it might not get looked after, and then it will look messy. And similarly, when we change the land use and we look at different aesthetics and we plant pollinators, for example, they can look messy in the autumn as we wait for them to set seed. So it's dealing with these perceptions really of the public and trying to reassure them. And then there are some very practical considerations. So sometimes, for example, we've wanted to put trees somewhere where traditionally there's been a car parking space. So we have concerns about the loss of parking space or the loss of facilities. And then there's the nuisance factor. So when you plant trees, quite often you then have falling leaves or they can block a view. And these are all issues that people sometimes raise with us. In Liverpool, we did have some opposition about our saltwater floating ecosystem island, which is based down at Wapping Dock. And the concerns here are from residents, and they were worried that the open space element might disappear and that placing an island there might actually be the start of potential planning creep. So that once we'd got a floating island in, we might then get floating boats and houseboats, and it might become a residential area, which was not on the agenda. But they were also concerned about the aesthetics, what the island might look like, and how it might impact other water users. We have a water sports centre nearby, and also, which we were also concerned about, to be fair, attraction of antisocial behaviour, because we didn't want people thinking that they could swim out to it, etc., etc. But actually, none of these concerns actually materialised at all. And so far, the island has been a real success, and it's actually been the source of inquiry from Seattle, Romania, Australia, and most recently, we were contacted by a first American Indian tribe who was keen to use something very similar to the island to grow their traditional medicines to combat climate change. So yeah, consultation is always really important, but opposition is to be expected. Another barrier I wanted to raise was about the surveys, and by this I mean environmental, the utilities, and the other surveys that we undertake. I think when we started our journey, we did expect to undertake some basic surveys. We knew we'd have to look under the roads and the pavements to look at the utilities and the communications. We knew we'd have to look at junctions for road safety. We knew there'd be some general environmental surveys and things like that. But there were a number of specialist surveys that we didn't anticipate at the beginning. So when we put in our water retention ponds, we had to undertake a topographical survey for water levels and land levels. We needed to test for the presence of newts, and we used water DNA testing for that, but you can only do that for a very short period of the year, and we were very fortunate that we were in that period. And also we had to do things like redesign some of the outflows. So we didn't anticipate any of those at the beginning. Likewise, our highways engineers were a little bit nervous about some of the work we were doing near the roads, and they wanted us to undertake road traffic safety audits. Our environmental health officers were keen that we looked at noise issues for when we were doing city centre construction. The street lighting engineer wanted us to stress test lampposts before we could put pollinators or other hanging materials on them. And then we had one site where there was an underground car park, and so they were keen that we did some structural surveys as well. So I think in summary, I'd say it's not possible at the start to necessarily always identify the surveys that you need. And we also found that where we had data on things like utilities under the pavements and the roads, they weren't actually very accurate. Some environmental surveys like the newts were very limited in terms of times of the year at which you can do them. Others, like the road traffic safety audit, wasn't really on our agenda. We weren't even aware of it before we started. And while surveys are really useful and they will inform your project, they will also deliver, they will both inform it, but they will also delay the delivery of it. And then my final barrier or challenge is about the wider approvals, permissions and licenses. So like many others, we needed to get stakeholder approval, be that third party, utility companies, community groups, political approvals. And then there's all sorts of permissions. So as an officer, we are required to write reports that deal with financial, legal issues, reports to our senior managers, presentations to scrutiny committees, discussions with procurement staff. We needed planning permissions for some of our NBS. And then when we come on to licenses, we incurred some additional costs here for the green wall above the highway, or creating license agreements for NBS hosts that were going to host some of the NBS structures for us. And then there's always the unexpected, as I say to Alicia. And on this occasion, the unexpected came when we were putting our green wall in place. It happened at the time that the first report came out after the Grenfell Tower fire, and green walls then became classed as an external cladding. And our building control then asked us to undertake an additional fire calculations, which were very difficult to find someone that could actually do them, and added an additional cost to the project as well. So really, I suppose each of these sometimes can be a barrier or a challenge, but each process is different. Each has its own timescale, and some will take longer than others. Thank you, that's me.
Thank you, Juliette. And sorry again for the slides. I thought that we had fixed the issue with the timer, but that was not the case. No, thank you for adapting to this, Juliette. No problem, Nancy. Then the last speaker of today, Luc from the UNaLab project again.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to tell something about the nature-based solutions and the UNaLab project. Will there be any slides, or because I have some nice pictures, I think it's nice to talk with the pictures.
Can you see the slide? Or,
yeah, now I can see them.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. I will tell you something about the financing and the for any MBS projects. Don't be scared. I won't have too many slides with only text. So I have some pictures as well. So it's the last presentation. It's always hard to keep your mind up to this presentation. I have 4 subjects I will run through quickly. It's about the maintenance cost. It's about investing in public space. It's investing in some other area, private area, which is not the core business of the owner of the area to make it look nice. And combining projects. You can have the next slide, please. First one is about the maintenance cost. If you look at public space, the municipality does reserve some money for maintaining public space, and some of the nature-based solutions take more space than just the street. So, for instance, the green facades of, if you look at the middle page of middle picture with a water barrel. So, and those subjects take a lot more money or need more money, and also it's not money which is reserved for maintaining public space. So it's good to realize that you need extra money for maintenance. Can I have the next slide, please? This is about investing in from private partners in public space or future public space. If you look at the right picture, this is public space, but the owner of the building behind it was willing to invest in this transformation of the square. It used to be completely paved, and nowadays we like green areas more and more, also through to COVID. And he wanted to invest because he thinks that this building and the users of the building like this very much, so he was willing to pay for it. On the left side, it's private property right now, and we want to transfer the inner area, which used to be a parking area, into a green park. And through a zoning plan, we forced the owner to transfer it into a park. And after the construction of this park, it will be transferred to the municipality, so it will be public space. Next slide, please. This is about an area which is owned by a mental health company. And it's already a very nice area. They want to daylight a river here. And what you see in this case is that if it's not a core business of such an institute, that if something is happening in their own area, then the money goes to the public, to the mental health care, of course. So the ideas of the project to transfer this area dates from years and years ago. And now we invested some public money and some other resources of fundings to transfer this area. And then they finally, although it's not going very smoothly, they are going to invest in their own area to make it even nicer. Next slide, please. These are some plans for this area which they have been made. It's quite a big area. And you can see that there's more green, but also the water part, the water are connected to each other. So it will be a functioning water system again. The last slide, please. This is about a project near to the City Hall. And there are a lot of parties involved in this area. And as soon as you start to combine projects, it seems to be very wise and handy to do that, but the objective or the contra thing is that if you are going to combine projects, that there's always one project which is slower, so it will slow down the total project very much. And if there's funding in it, it's even worse. So this is something which I wouldn't advise to do. If there's, if you have a project, just try to make it one owner and one initiative, and just collect ideas from other parties, but not multiple initiatives to combine here. It's, I think, the last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. And just a second, please. Yes, thank you, Luke. And I really wanted to thank all the speakers for your presentations. I think it's really nice to come with the views and the experiences from these 3 projects. And I actually wanted to thank in particular the cities representatives that are part of the project and that are here today. We often see the coordinators in this type of the project, so it's really nice to see this type of partners here. And also to thank you for this front runner role that you are taking in the area of nature-based solutions and setting up the path for other cities to go in this way. This slide, the speakers are providing to everybody, to the audience, a list of resources that might be useful for you, including some reports that I mentioned, that were mentioned before. A report evaluating the impact of nature-based solutions, Handbook for Practitioners, is a report that comes from the collaboration of 17 of these nature-based solution projects. There's also the report that I mentioned before, that was mentioned before by Ernesta, Public Procurement of Nature-Based Solutions, and other relevant reports from the EEA and EEP, and the last one on the valorization reports that reflects on the state of the art of EU-funded projects. All the links are included there in the presentations for you to access to them. And we'll go now to the final part of the session, that is a panel discussion. There's one more person from the project, Laura Wendling, who didn't speak today, but will take care of moderating this final session. And Laura, I'll also introduce you, since I took the time in the beginning in the introduction, trying to present all the speakers. I'll also introduce you. Laura is coordinator of UNaLab. She works at the VTT Technical Research Center of Finland. And well, she is a specialist on nature-based solutions, on environmental specialist on this. And besides coordinating the UNaLab project, Laura has a leading role on one of these task forces, Horizon 2020 MBS task forces, in particular on the one working on MBS impact evaluation. And she's one of the main authors of one of these publications that we just showed in the previous slide, the first one. So Laura, I give you the floor.
Great, thanks, Laura, and thank you for the introduction. So we had some really interesting presentations today, and there are a number of questions that have come up. I've gotten a few private messages in the chat, but if anybody would like to ask a question, you can either raise your hand and we can call on you, or you can write it in the chat, and I can direct it to the panel. But maybe if no one has their hand raised presently, one of the big questions is how interdepartmental relationships influence financing and procurement. So I guess I'd like to ask our panelists, those of us from cities, within municipalities, which departments are those that most often launch the process for implementation of MBS in cities? And how does the level of collaboration across departments influence these processes? Alicia, would you be willing to take that question first, and then maybe we can pass it on?
Yes, of course. Thank you. In the case of Biodiversity Council, there are several departments that are implementing nature solutions. For instance, the Public Space Service, which is in charge of roads and pavements, but also the Parks and Garden Service, who is in charge of the environmental area, and also the innovation area, that is the one that I belong to the innovation. So yeah, the influence between the departments in the implementation is crucial and total. The construction projects must be validated by all areas or services with competencies. So this generates different criteria, different justification, different interests. So it's essential for us to reach agreements. So sometimes this may cause even delays in the implementation.
Thanks, Lucia. Maybe we could pass to Marit next. Marit, you talked about the innovation vouchers. How much interdepartmental collaboration did that require? And was that a very different process from what you normally do with NBS implementation?
Yes, that was different from many other NBSs, because normally the NBSs in the city of Tampere and many other cities are implemented into the public areas. And in the small scale NBS case, they were implemented in the private areas. But I think that in general, the key units involved in the implementation of the nature-based solutions are the zoning unit, who does like the larger urban planning, and then we have a unit called green areas and storm waters, and that unit is in charge of implementing public parks. And then when we go to the nature-based solutions that are integrated into the buildings, then we need to involve new units, the building sector.
Thanks, Marit. Michelle or Luke, maybe you could comment next. I mean, what kind of level of collaboration do you see in your cities, and how does that influence the implementation process?
Do you want me to go, Luke?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I think, being brutally honest, in Manchester, we are still being led by externally funded projects. They're the what, so like the GrowGreen demonstration project and other projects that we've got from external funding that we've been able to develop. But where we're seeing that take hold really is in private sector development. So big development schemes have now got NBS in them. They're not funded by the council, but the developers are seeing the potential in putting them in there. So for example, one of the ones that Sophie put up on the screen is a development called Mayfield, which is a large multi-use area. So it's got commercial spaces, it's got residential spaces, and it's going to have a new park in it. But it's also going to have a big piece of river renaturalisation, because the river that runs through there at the minute is culverted. So what we're seeing is that actually private sector developers are leading the charge on this, and the city council is catching up in terms of its core business. So we're not seeing it embedded into any highway schemes or any school building programs or any other public sector building programs that we've got going on, but private sector developers are wanting to put it in. So the council is kind of now having to play catch up, basically. Would you agree with me, Sophie?
Yeah, I probably would.
Yeah. So we're having to quickly catch up with what the developers are doing. Our demonstration project has been a good kind of knowledge awareness raising, but not so much so that we are now embedding it into a programme of council activity. The private sector is on it before we are, and we're playing catch up.
Oh, thanks, Michelle. That's a really good answer. Really helpful. Luke, before we pass to you, can I add just a little twist to this question? So in addition to thinking about the interdepartmental collaboration that's required, you talked a lot about how different projects and having these competing timelines or competing objectives can really complicate things. And I wondered how much that influences or is influenced by interdepartmental collaboration on MBS implementation.
Yeah, good question. Don't make it too easy. I think what the main problem with MBS introduction in public space is that the lack of space. And especially if I look at Eindhoven, it's a car city actually. So a lot of space is reserved for cars, even more than just an ordinary other city, I guess. And what would help if the transportation or the traffic department would claim less space for cars. So a transformation of mobility is essential, I think, to become a more nature-based city. I think that's the most essential part. If I look at the city of Eindhoven, we have a department who is coordinating all the projects in public space, and that's functioning pretty well. Still, they face the same problem, that there's a lack of space in public space. So that stays a problem.
Right.
Is that enough an answer?
Yeah, thanks, Luc. Thank you very much. And Juliet, I haven't forgotten you, but there's a question here about maintenance that I would really like to bring to your attention. But first, I want to step back just a little bit. Michelle mentioned in her talk, her presentation about so revenue funding versus like capital expenditure for implementation funding. And there was one of the very first questions was related to Ernesto's talk about, so other than the European Commission based funding instruments, what are some other possible sources of NBS financing? And in particular, are there any that you could recommend that would help with this issue of the long-term maintenance?
Is that a question for me, Juliet?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. In terms of the maintenance, really, longer term maintenance is an issue. I think, we can establish short-term dowries and things like that. We can ask third-party individuals, private land and building owners where we've invested the capital for the MBS to take on the maintenance. But there are still some sites where there is no real exit strategy. There's not many sources or many places you can go to. We have sought to engage some community groups who are keen to help maintain some pollinators or some trees in containers, smaller scale areas. We are looking actually at sponsorship because we've invested quite heavily in the capital element of things like the green walls and the floating islands. And if we can secure long-term maintenance agreements with businesses that want to sponsor them, then that's an opportunity to enable us to retain that nature-based solution in the city and to get the multiple benefits from it. But also it's an opportunity for a business to effectively quite cheaply buy into promoting or supporting a nature-based solution, hopefully as part of a journey they might make themselves in terms of then expanding that or doing something themselves. But I don't think there's an easy answer. I think Michelle alluded to that in her discussion, that the revenue issue about that ongoing maintenance is probably one of the biggest headaches.
Yeah, Ernesta, would you like to add anything? I mean, based on.
Thank you. I think this was perhaps not such a clear-cut answer, but it was a rather good answer, and I wanted to actually comment in a similar direction in terms of financing beyond these big European projects that we have. So of course there's different mechanisms that could be looked at, but I think what we saw also in the research that we did in UNaLab is that the communities could be really leveraged. The success of that, of course, depends on the local context and on many things, but we saw examples where even, certain businesses in the street were able to organize themselves and set up rather small scale NBS, but still, it would add the shade, it would add a bit of cooling in the street. So I think perhaps in terms of how to find alternative sources for the private capital to come in, I would say do not forget the communities that are there, and maybe try to empower them a little bit to take on the risks and take on the initiative. I think I would like to stop here before going into other discussions on, I don't know, green bonds or whatever. I think then things become a bit more complicated. But maybe one more thought just came to my mind was that in terms of thinking of how to raise funds for NBS to ensure sustainability, I remember one idea that was always mentioned in these discussions in this task force, that NBS should be rather seen more and more as part of the critical city infrastructure, so that it's not gray versus green, but rather that NBS is a part of just overall city infrastructure. It is an infrastructure asset that yields certain benefits. And if it's viewed in that way, then perhaps it's also easier to find ways how to finance it, especially if the savings are accounted for. So this is all, talk. I think practice is a lot more complicated. If it was easy, perhaps we wouldn't even have such events. It would just be, let's just do it. But these are the answers I can give right now to give a bit of a thought impulse. And yeah, I think there's a lot more to discuss here, but maybe we can give more screen time to cities here.
Yeah, and so there's a common theme in, I guess, a lot of our presentations. We're really looking very closely at this collaboration with stakeholders and citizens. So these public-private collaborations. And this really opens a debate on whose job is it, whose responsibility is renaturing a city? Who owns it? And is the responsibility local stakeholders, or is it the city itself, the city, the municipality, or other government organization? Or how can this be shared effectively with the private sector and citizens? And I'd like to open that up to the full panel. Sophie, you look like you have an answer right on the tip of your tongue.
I was just writing down the question. I suppose I was thinking about it in the context of, in Manchester, as I said, we've got our green infrastructure strategy that kind of sits alongside the climate change strategy. Now, the climate change strategy in Manchester is also a strategy that's been co-created. It's not owned by the city council, it is the city's climate change strategy. And from that, we're seeing, there's obviously increased support for that from the city council since all the climate emergency declarations. But I think the sort of climate adaptation and just general green infrastructure strand of that climate change action plan is leading, and that means in our case in Manchester it's sort of everybody that's involved in that plan. So it is the small scale projects, the things happening in the local areas. The politicians in Manchester have recently committed £1 million to tree planting over the next couple of years. They see that as really key, as a really key thing. We're creating a strategy about where we ought to be putting the trees, what's the right place to put them. We've also seen the Parks Department be given a sort of reasonably large discretionary budget as well to make some capital improvements on parks. So I think I think it's being led from the bottom. I think it's something that politicians and decision makers are seeing that the people want. The people are valuing their parks at the moment in this time, and I think they are starting to move on that, and they are seeing that the people, especially the young people in our city, have been really key on pushing the climate agenda and the associations that green has with that. Sorry, that's not very precise, but I think I think
No, I
in
think
general,
it's
everybody is pulling together towards this. How quickly it's happening and whether it's quick enough is another question, but I think it is something that is seen as something that everybody wants.
No, I think that's a nice response, and it ties in with what Michelle was saying about having the public area, the new green spaces maintained in collaboration with citizens. But how about other cities? How do the public-private collaborations work in your city, and how is ownership of NBS involved?
Well, if I look at the city of Eindhoven, we have some standard contract for citizens. If they want to maintain part of public space, then they can sign in a contract and they can do the maintenance. So that works pretty well. And more we're trying to make some arrangements with other parties to do some maintenance in public space. And if some private contractor creates a bit of future public space, then we are looking into it, and he can transfer it to the municipality just for €1, and we do the maintenance afterwards. I think because if we have a lot of public space, of course, and maintenance will become cheaper if you have a large area. But the nice thing to know is that if you choose the right solutions, that green areas or nature-based solutions may be cheaper in maintenance than just pavement. So that's something we experience as well. So that makes it attractive also for politicians to make this change or this move to choose for nature-based solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. That's a good point. What about in Valladolid or in Tampere?
Yeah, in our case, I show you a couple of examples of public-private agreements that have worked very well. But at least in Spain, I would say in general, committed citizens understand that they also have part of responsibility in the renaturalization of the city. In general, in making your city a more sustainable, green and healthy place. But in our area, the concept of community, when you mention, I envy when you, for instance, in England, speak about the work of the community. We don't have that sense of belonging to some place or belonging to somewhere. So co-creation works very well, but when we are facing that we have to make knock to the citizens and ask them if they want to sponsor nature solutions, for instance. But the community is not very well organized in our place. Of course, the city council is leading the change and trying to show the citizens the importance of green areas and nature solutions, but also mobility and energy efficiency and so on. But also private entities and civil associations and universities should drive the change also. Maybe it's not also many specific, but in fact, our work is making all the change, all the different stakeholders of the city work together. And sometimes it's not easy, in fact.
From Tampere's side, I think that the aspect I could add to this discussion is the strong public sector that we have in Finland. And I think that in our case, the municipality has a big role in guiding urban development so that nature-based solutions are included when the space is planned. And also municipality could act as a front runner by making good quality parks and public green areas. And for example, we have recently introduced a new stormwater fee that can be used as a resource to implement nature-based solutions, where one aim is to manage stormwaters in the city. And those are public investments, and also cities guiding private building projects, so that we have recently introduced this, is it green factor? So that if there is a certain area of the building project, there needs to be a certain percentage of that area needs to be green and good quality green. But then we have also quite active citizens. I have to admit that I participate from the car, because I'm in the Vuores Living Lab waiting for the volunteer work with the residents to remove innovative species. So it's not only the city that does the work, but also people are active, but maybe the concept of nature-based solutions is not yet known so well, and municipality has a big role in acting as a front runner.
Thanks, Marit. So one really quick question I'd like to direct to Juliet. So you talked a lot about implementing NBS in land or buildings that are owned by third parties. How could we ensure the continuing maintenance of NBS in these conditions?
Okay, thank you. What we've done in Liverpool is where we've provided capital investment onto third-party land or buildings, we've put in place a template agreement, a legal agreement that sets out what we expect from them. Because if we're giving somebody a beautiful green wall, we want them to maintain it. So the agreement sets out very clearly the roles and responsibilities, the point at which the council will seek to establish the green wall, and the point at which the building owner, for example, will take on the future maintenance of the green wall. And to help that happen, what we've done is we've tried to encourage the owners of the building to attend the green wall maintenance service visits to understand a little bit more about what's involved, about the irrigation, the systems, the planting, because some of these are specialist areas and they're not maintenance that can be undertaken just by a general handy person, for example. So in doing that, we hope that the owner of the green wall will understand that there is a need to engage professionals to manage the green wall for its best, the best it can be. But there maybe are some elements that they can do themselves. So at the moment, the maintenance for the green wall maybe costs £7,000 a year and has a monthly visit. But when the council hands it over formally to the building owner, it might be that the building owner can undertake some of the low-level maintenance, such as the deadheading or some trimming or some environmental spraying. But when we do the serious work, which is the replanting or the pest control or whatever else, then they understand that there's still a need for them to engage professionals to support them. So we hope that the agreement will help, and we hope that having them shadow and understand how the system works will also put them in a good position. But I'll be honest and say that even though we have a legal agreement with them, in the event that they didn't care for the green wall and it became to look messy or unsightly, there's not a lot we can do unless we felt it posed a fire risk or something like that. So although we have a legal agreement, a lot of the time it just boils down to goodwill, I think, and having a good relationship with the landowner and them understanding the benefits of what they've got.
Thanks, Julia. Unfortunately, I think we have to close our session. I'd like to hand over to Laura to give us a bit of a summary.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you all for your contributions, and thank you for the very interesting presentations and also for this discussion. And I think it's really useful that what you shared today on the issues that you're encountering and the recommendations that you are providing to the audience today. I'll pick only on one thing that, and I think it was Michelle mentioned, that that besides budget, is important to have the political willing behind, and this is often blocking or allowing the NBS going through. And well, that we hope that with the Green Deal, the new biodiversity strategy and climate adaptation strategy, all these developments that are happening at the EU level will contribute to enhance this policy, this political willing. Laura, you want to say anything else? I need to close now because we are going to be push out of the session, so with no more time, just to quickly remind you of the virtual fair tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow afternoon, 16th of June, and remind you also of the networking platform to which you have access through your dashboards. This is to facilitate networking among the participants in the event. Also to remind you that all the recordings of the sessions will be available in the website of the event. And well, thank you again to all the speakers, and thank you for all the attendance to the session.
And thank you, Laura.
Bye, good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.